Hey boys and girls, it's Sergeant Matt, and that means it's time again for Defending the Faith. I'm excited that you've been with me the past few weeks during these video segments, and I hope that you're learning a lot. If you remember, last week we learned how we can know that Jesus really was a real person. Do you remember how I had a picture of George Washington with me? And we talked about how we can know that George Washington was a real person, we can also know that Jesus was a real person, because people who knew him and even people who hated him, they wrote things down about him and they told people about him. And today we have a lot of those things gathered together in the New Testament in our Bibles, and we can read them for ourselves, and that's amazing. Well, I want to tell you that most of you know this, but while Jesus was here on this very earth that me and you are on right now, he taught many, many helpful things. And specifically, he taught us a lot of things about how we should live our lives. And I'm sure you're very familiar with those things that Jesus said. He taught us things like we ought to love our neighbor and love people around us. He even taught us that we should love our enemies. Can you believe that? And he said that we should pray for those people that even hate us. That's amazing. And Jesus even taught us things that we should help people that are poor and needy, that are in need. We should help those people. And he said that we should love God with all of our hearts and souls and minds. And he even taught us that we need to honor our moms and our dads. And those are great things, aren't they? Absolutely. And I think that if you went around and you told any of those things to almost anybody today, they would probably agree with you. They would say, yeah, I agree with that. Those are excellent things to do. And I'm glad Jesus taught those things. But did you know there were some things that Jesus taught that the people who were listening to him, they thought he was absolutely crazy for saying the things that he did. They really did. Now, Jesus didn't just go around saying things that everybody agreed with. He said very important things about himself. He said things like he could heal people of their sicknesses. He even said that he had the power over Satan himself. Jesus even said that he was the only way to the God who made the universe. And get this, he said he was the Son of God, and he said he had the power to forgive people's sins, just like God could forgive people's sins. Now you might hear that and you might think, wow, that's amazing. And the people that heard Jesus teaching those things, some of them said, that's great, we need to worship you. But others thought he was crazy for saying those things. Now that kind of brings me to a question. How do we know that Jesus was saying the truth? How do we know those things that he said about himself were actually true? How do we know he just wasn't making it up? Well, I want to answer that question, but before I do, I want to talk to you about money. That's right, I want to talk to you about money. You heard me right. Now, what if I told you that right now I have a $20 bill in my pocket? Would you believe me? And you may be shaking your head yes or not, or shaking your head no, I don't know. Maybe you don't trust me. Well, maybe this will make it a little bit easier. Here we go. Here is the $20 bill. Now, do you believe me that I have a $20 bill with me? Do you? You do? Well, that's good. But how do you know that this is a real $20 bill? Couldn't it just be a fake? How do you know that this is the real thing? Well, I want to talk to you about something that's really interesting. I want to show you a trick that you can do with money. Because there are people who work at stores and who work at banks and things that take money. They need a way to be able to tell whether or not the money they're taking is real. They need to be able to tell if it's true money. And that makes sense, because we don't just want people making their own money, right? And then they could do whatever they wanted, and that would be like stealing. No, we want to be able to tell if a piece of money is real or not. Now, would you like to learn one of the ways that people who work with money can tell whether this piece of money is real or not? Would you like to learn one of those tricks? Okay, I'm going to teach it to you. Now, this won't work with a $1 bill, but it should work with anything higher than that in American money, okay? So if you need to borrow some, that's perfectly great, but if you can't, that's fine too. I just want you to listen. Now, I'm going to take this piece of money, this $20 bill, and what you want to do with it is you want to hold it up against the light somewhere. Maybe you're outside and you can hold it up against the sky, or maybe you're inside and you can hold it up to a light on the ceiling or a lamp beside your bed or something like that, but hold it up next to a light and look at one of the sides, either the left side or the right side, and you should see something really interesting if you look really, really hard. You should see a hidden picture appear. It's actually a hidden picture that isn't there unless you hold it up to the light. Isn't that amazing? Well, that hidden picture that's on that piece of money, that is called a watermark. And a watermark does something very important. A watermark lets us know that the piece of money we have right here is a real piece of money. Because if it was fake, then it probably wouldn't have the watermark on it, because they're very difficult to make. Well, this is great. We have a way to tell whether or not the money we have is real or fake. But how do we know that what Jesus said was real or fake? What if there was some way that we could tell that Jesus was telling the truth? Well, guess what? Just like this watermark tells us that if the money we have is true money, there is something that happened to Jesus that tells us that he was telling the truth. What if God did something to Jesus to prove to us that Jesus really was who he said he was? Well, guess what? He did. And I'm excited to announce that to you. He did, because God did something very important. God showed us that Jesus was who he said he was by raising Jesus from the dead. He raised him from the dead, and this is extremely important. This is what we call the resurrection of Jesus. And it is so, so very important. And it is the most important thing about our faith. Paul even writes in the Bible that without the resurrection, if the resurrection of Jesus did not happen, then Paul said, our faith is vain. It's empty. It's meaningless if Jesus didn't raise from the dead. So this is very important stuff that we're talking about. But because if Jesus really did die on the cross, and God really did raise him from the dead, then that was like God putting a watermark on everything that Jesus said and did, and saying, yes, that is absolutely true. And that is how God proved to us that we, human beings, all of us, could put our faith and our trust in Jesus. And I'm so glad that we can. So I want you to remember that if someone ever asks you a question like, how do you know what Jesus said was true? Or maybe they'll ask you something like, how do you know that Christianity is the only true religion? Then you can talk to them about the watermark in our money. And you can say there's a way that we can tell if money is real or if it's fake. And there's also a way that we can tell if what Jesus said was true or false. And the way that we do that is we can know that God raised Jesus from the dead to show us. And boys and girls, I want you to always remember how important the resurrection of Jesus is. It is what gives us foundation to our faith. It is so very important. And we can know that Jesus was who he said he was, and we can trust him to forgive us of our sins because he really was raised from the dead. You guys are doing a great job at the missions and the challenges. I want you to keep it up, and I will see you next week.